Welcome back. So we are going to go into our next segment of our looking into some of the potential busts in this draft. And so to kick it off, Davis, who do you have as your first bust?
So I know this might be a little spicy, and we've talked about it in the past about my disagreements on this whole situation, but it's going to come to no surprise to our listeners around the world that I have Lamelo Ball as my first big bust. And yes, this is a guy that is very controversial coming into this draft class. Teams are either in love with him or they're trying to stay away from him with a 10-foot pole. And I think there's some good reason behind that, but my biggest concern for him is that if he's not in a city or a team that he doesn't really like a lot, if he doesn't have success his first year, I think we'll see him go back to his old habits in terms of his lack of motor on defense. And if he isn't able to become an efficient scorer at the NBA level, which has been a question mark, kind of coming into this draft, and kind of one of the big question marks on Lamelo Ball is his shooting efficiency, which we've also kind of seen guys like Ben Simmons that are these tall guards that don't necessarily challenge a guy from three, but at the same time Lamelo Ball does have more of those knockdown potentials in his bag than someone like Ben Simmons. I'm not trying to compare those two because Ben Simmons is an elite defender, and offers a lot more than LaMelo, in my opinion. But in the same sense, we haven't really been able to see LaMelo Ball against any of his peers. He hasn't really competed against any of these other guys in the draft class outside of RJ Hampton. And we've seen him at the high school level, when we typically start to see and evaluate draft potential. He was with Onyeka Okongwu and Lonzo Ball for a hot sec. Well, 1 year with Lonzo, but he got to develop alongside Onyeka Okongwu. And so, talk about having two high school kids that are going to go into the lottery, and then you add Lonzo Ball in there too. Like, yeah, he's going to look good. They're not going to have turnover reels on YouTube. You're going to see all the flashy passes, all the stuff that whenever they're dominating teams. But the turnovers are a huge question mark for me. His lack of defense is a huge question mark for me. And, if, his shooting efficiency for me is just something that I'm not going to believe until I see it. And so, for those three reasons, he's going to be, my first big bust potential.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I have him as my rookie of the year because I'm still high on him, but I agree there are a lot of very, very valid question marks about his game. And I mean, just personally, I expect him to sort of push past those, but I can definitely understand why people would say, you know what, I can't believe it until I see it, as you said. But I'm going to go ahead and go to my first bust, which is Killian Hayes. And a big reason to start out with him is like, I have seen like he is one player for me. It's so every mock draft I see, I mean, he's the fourth pick or he's like the 10th. I mean, I don't understand. Like he moves around so much, and to me, that shows a lot of question marks about his game. And the big thing, there are two things I just personally don't like about his game, and I think it's why I could definitely see him being a bust. The first is I don't love his shooting ability. I mean, I think he has the opportunity to become a great shooter, but I think he needs to heavily improve on that. And I mean, especially as a guard in the NBA, you've got to shoot. I mean, we've had conversations about. I'm not saying Killian Hayes is necessarily going to be like this player, but we've had conversations about Ricky Rubio and how Ricky Rubio can't shoot, and he's hindering that offense out there in Phoenix. But my biggest concern for him is just how left-handed dominant he is. I mean, and to me, like when I watch it, it's bad. Like it's so bad. Like exactly what he's going to do every time. A slight comparison is almost with Zion Williamson. I think Zion Williamson, I love him to death, but the dude is so left-hand dominant. And I think the one exception is like, he's going to his left and you still can't stop it. Whereas Killian Hayes is a guard and you're going to be able to really plan against that and prepare. And so I think that's going to hurt him a lot. I've seen in a couple mock drafts that I looked at yesterday that a lot of teams had him going to the Knicks. I mean, him and RJ, I would hate that. I think that would not work well at all. They kind of are a little similar to me. They're both guys who sort of need to run the offense and both can't shoot, and they're both left-handed. Um, but that's kind of what I'm afraid I just don't. He's not an extremely athletic guard. I'm really worried about how dominant he is left-handed. I think that's going to really cause him to struggle in the NBA, and so that's why I have him as my first bust candidate.
Yeah, which I respectfully disagree. That's fine. I actually really, really like Killian Hayes. He was one of the guys I wanted to, mention for my potential rookie of the year. I just couldn't pull the trigger on him. But I'm not as worried about his shot creation and, knockdown potential as you might be. He's one of the younger players entering this draft. He's still 18 years old. But, his playmaking is definitely his strength. And whenever he is locked in on defense, he's very good at reading the lanes and being able to jump those and time them very well. And something else, like his free throw percentage, not that that says a whole lot, but his free throw percentage is, almost 88%. And so, I think, yes, his catch and shoot 3-point percentage is horrible, but his off the dribble 3-point percentage is, much, much higher. And so I think that, because he's one of the more prolific guys in this draft class, specifically with his creation on the pick and roll, like going to a place like the Knicks might not be horrible in my opinion, just because I can't even imagine, a Killian Hayes and Mitchell Robinson pick and roll. That seems a little nasty to me, if I'm being honest. And yes, I understand the whole left-hand dominant situation. It's, a big concern for a lot of people, but at the same time, because he's such a crafty guard in terms of his playmaking, and he's very, reliant on the pick and roll to kind of open up the rest of his game. I don't think that becomes as much of a concern, just because, like, I don't know, like it just, for me, yes, he's left-hand dominant. That's fine, but I don't know where I was trying to go with that, but I like Killian Hayes. I do.
Okay.
So I will go into my next potential bust profile, and that's going to be Alexiev Pokolsky. I don't even know how to pronounce his name, and that's on me. I apologize. But a Greek boy, 7-footer that, is literally a walking stick in terms of his frame. There's a lot of European talent that will, get real high on draft board just because of their potential. And I get that. But this guy, in my opinion, anytime I watch him play, he just looks like he looks very unnatural. And like he doesn't have, that next level to his game. And I feel like once there's bigger bodies around him, guys that are going to be in his face defensively on the perimeter, because he's a pretty good knockdown, like 3-point shooter for a 7-footer. But this dude just screams like European bust to me, and it has it written all over it. The only way that I'm going to be convinced before seeing him in the NBA is if the Spurs take a gamble on him. Spurs or the Mavericks. If either of those teams pick him, I'm going to say, okay, no, I
He's
don't
gonna be
know
the best player of all time.
yeah, but like, because those teams are very good at evaluating overseas talent, and I've only seen some limited stuff on YouTube or different montages. And so, I'm not spending every second of every day evaluating European talent, but this dude just seems to me like he's got bust written all over him.
So it's funny you say that because he was actually one of the people I was looking at as a potential bust. I would say out of a lot of the international prospects in this draft, he's definitely a little bit lower on the totem pole there, and so I'm definitely not expecting big things from him. That's for sure. I guess it's just hate on Alexi Day. I don't know, but I'm gonna go ahead and hop into my second bust. So I was a little bit high on him earlier. I mean, and by high I mean I was talking about him a little bit earlier in this episode, but I think he's a boomer bust candidate. That's Tyrese Maxey. I don't really expect him to necessarily go into the lottery, but I think he's gonna get selected just right outside of it. And the reason why is because I think he brings a lot of like really good things as we talked about. I mean, he's this clutch player. He's got the mentality. He's a solid shooter, and he's just got this like aggressive, explosive sort of gameplay, game style to him. And I think that's a big positive for him. But I'm just genuinely concerned about a lot of the other aspects of his game. I'm concerned that he's not going to be a great facilitator in the NBA. I don't think he's going to be able to play that point guard role. I think he's going to be more limited to a shooting guard role. Well, if he's in the shooting guard role, he's not going to be handling the ball as much. I don't think he's going to be able to. He's going to be more of a catch and shoot, score off cuts kind of guy. And I don't think that necessarily plays to his strengths. I think his strengths are more geared towards that point guard role. But at the same time, that's where his weaknesses are. I don't see him being someone that can run the floor for a team. He's not going to run a team's offense. I don't think that's where he's going to go. And so to me, that's why I have him kind of as this boomer bust candidate. Is just because, I mean, he could come out and just like, holy cow, this dude's god tier at a point guard, and he's going to be an elite point guard for years to come. And I think he definitely has the potential to do that. But I'm just genuinely concerned that he's not going to improve other aspects of his game, namely facilitation, but especially defensively. I think that's another area he can improve. He's by no means a large guard. I mean, he's 6'3", which isn't small, but I mean, that's going to more push under the point guard, as I've been saying. And so it's more of I'm concerned he's not going to be able to play that point guard role in the NBA. And that's why I think he's going to be a bust.
Yeah, no, those are definitely valid concerns. So let's go into our final question that we're going to be answering, and that's who might rise and fall on draft night. And I want to preface this with a little quick aside, and that's the fact that because this is not a very top heavy draft class, I think this is the most intriguing question regarding this class, because in any of these mock drafts, you might see guys go, number 5, but you could see him go like, 16. And, talk about a guy like Cole Anthony. Maybe he'll go late lottery. Maybe he'll go late first round. There's a lot of question marks all around this draft class, even with, just the top 3. Everyone's saying that it has to be Anthony Edwards, Lamelo Ball, and James Wiseman. But, I wouldn't be surprised on draft night if Onyeka Okongwu or Killian Hayes or Obi Toppin, just like someone that there's like another guy that sneaks in there that just is not on a lot of people's radars in terms of these top 3 like picks. Like in general, this is a draft to me that like there's going to be a lot of like surprises on draft
There's
night.
going to be a lot of movement.
And that's why this is like one of the more interesting drafts to me, even though, the talent might not be there across the board. Which even when I say that, like when I say that the talent isn't there from this draft class, I'm not saying that, this is a bad draft class by any means. Like they are not top heavy. They don't have guys that are, going to be vying for, all-star teams like their first or second year. But I do think there's a lot of longevity in terms of role players from this draft class that can make their name in the NBA for a long time. And I think this is a pretty deep draft class as well. And I think those 2 reasons combined are why we're seeing a lot of guys kind of projected anywhere and everywhere in all these types of mock drafts. And it'll be interesting to see kind of on draft night how all these teams have kind of been making their big board and kind of seeing what each team needs. So let's start with the first of that question. Who can we see rising on draft night?
So I can kick it off, I guess. So someone that I think might kind of push up a little bit, and we've kind of talked about it a little bit. I could see him going. I don't think he'll break top 3, but I could see him moving as upwards as 4 is Isaac Okoro. And I just think he brings so much defensively, and that's something a lot of teams are going to really, really value here in the NBA. Currently picking at 4 is the Chicago Bulls. I mean, I just kind of expect them to sort of take the best player available, but at the same time, I mean, their defense was pretty terrible last year. I know a lot of that was with their coaching, but I think Isaac Okoro is a great prospect. I think he brings a lot to the table, and I think he's someone that could move up in the draft. Also, one thing to kind of add on to what you were kind of prefacing with this question that we're talking about now, to all our viewers out there, another thing in this draft, I expect us to see a substantial amount of draft trades. I mean, substantial. I think this draft, it's going to be mind-boggling. I think there's going to be players going to be like, why in the heck are these players getting picked this high? We're going to see crazy players drop late. There's going to be tons of trades. And so I think this is going to be a really entertaining draft to watch. I think a lot of people's mock drafts are going to get definitely blown up on draft night. But yeah, I think Isaac Okoro's going to be my first one. I think he's so talented defensively. He's elite on that end. And I think that's something a lot of teams are going to value.
So I'm going to throw out a couple names, and you tell me who you'd like to talk about. So Devin Vassell, Aaron Nesmith, Jamius Ramsey, Theo Maledon, Tyrell Terry. I know that's a lot.
I want to talk about Devin Vassell.
All right, so let's talk about Devin Vassell. Devin Vassell is a guy, in January that wasn't even on like most NBA, radars in general. If anything, he was going to be going second round, right? And, as we've been approaching the draft, he's been shooting up, more and more on all these projections and just kind of what teams are thinking of him once they've been able to see more and more game film. And, he was in a Florida State system that also featured Patrick Williams. Wait, I'm tripping.
I think it's Patrick Williams.
Patrick Patterson's the OKC boy, right?
Yeah, it's Patrick Williams.
Okay, yeah, sorry, a little brain fart there. But Patrick Williams was coming off the bench and still averaged like 15 points a game. But, if you watch any of those games, talk about a wing that is NBA ready. I think Devin Vassell is as NBA ready as it gets outside of Tyrese Halliburton, maybe Obi Toppin, just in terms of what they're able to offer NBA teams day one. And, Devin Vassell is a guy that, doesn't like blow your mind in terms of his ceiling for sure. But at the same time, I think a lot of teams aren't going to want to pass on him because of how valuable a wing 3-and-D player is in the NBA. So kind of with that being said, I could definitely see Devin Vassell going as high as, 7 or 8.
Yeah, another guy I kind of have moving up in sort of the same boat as Devin Vassell. I think as we were saying earlier with this draft is very heavy in the role players, solid starters for the next 10 years for these long careers. And so I think someone that's in that same boat is Sadiq Bey.
Yep.
Dude shot 45% from 3 in his sophomore year. He can help guard multiple positions. I just really think he kind of is that prototypical 3-and-D guy, and I think he's someone that can definitely move up into this draft into that maybe that 5-6 range. I think he's someone that can move up there, especially if a lot of teams are valuing what he brings to the table. Again, I think he's someone that will likely go to a contender. I think playoff teams are going to maybe make these draft night trades to sort of jump into the lottery and grab these guys that they're lottery players because we don't have these big all-star names this year. It's outside of the first couple guys. I just think, we got great players, but I think there's going to be a lot of playoff contenders that are going to really want to snap a lot of these guys up and not wait until late first round to grab some guys. And I think there's a lot of really good wings this year as well. Really good 3-and-D wings who can play great defense. And so I think Sadiq Bey is another guy who could definitely rise up in this draft.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point. And so going into my next guy who I think could surprise a lot of people and kind of jump ahead of other guards is Malachi Flynn. And I think I'm going to preface this with, because there are so many point guards, in this draft. I think that will be, one of the areas where there's a lot of big surprises, just in terms of, different teams are evaluating and having their, if they're looking for a guard, they might have all these dudes in different orders and they don't want to, miss their guy. And I think, Malachi Flynn could be that guy, junior out of San Diego State, averaged 19 points a game. But the biggest thing for me with him is that, throughout his 3 years in college, he's been able to, obviously improve his points per game each season. He's shooting better and better from three. He improved from 34% 2 seasons ago to 37% from three last season. And, he's been able to grab more rebounds, get more assists while limiting his turnovers. He's a guy that's already improving areas of his game that make him an attractive prospect, period. And so right now he's a guy that's, late first round, early second round. But I wouldn't be surprised if, he kind of jumps over someone like Cole Anthony or Kyra Lewis and just kind of shocks the world on draft night, just because, like I said, all these teams might have all their point guards, in slightly different orders. And so I think there's a lot of potential for guys to, rise and fall specifically in that position. And it'll be exciting to see here come next week.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to go into my first guy of someone I think that's going to fall in this draft. And so my first one's going to be Obi Toppin. I know that's a guy we've been talking about a lot. I'm not high on him. I don't get, I don't know. It's hard for me to wrap my head around that a lot of people think this guy is the fourth pick in the draft. It could even slip top three. It kind of blows my mind. I don't think he's a top five player. And I wouldn't be surprised at all for some teams to kind of recognize that and be like, I don't think this is our guy. And I really honestly expect him to slip. I would honestly be genuinely surprised if he went fourth or fifth in this draft. Like, I would be like, wow. I kind of see him as a 8, 9, 10 guy. I just think that I mean, he brings some like nice things to the table. I mean, he's this lob threat guy, but I mean, as we've talked about before, I mean, I don't think he's the best defender, especially we've talked about his lateral quickness and how poor he is on that end. I just don't expect him to be someone that gets drafted really high, especially because I expect a lot of teams to move up in the draft to sort of select some other guys up there. And so I think he's going to be someone that slips.
No, that's fair. I definitely think Obi Toppin's another guy that, well, to me, if you're saying like going 7, 8, 9 for Obi Toppin is slipping, I don't know if that's necessarily fair, because like I don't think there's a lot of mock drafts out there that honestly have him in the top 5, top 6. A
I've
lot of
seen
them
a
have
lot.
him
I've seen a bunch where he's
that are
4,
recent.
5. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. I
I know
also just
CBS
disagree,
has
because
it.
I think there's no way he goes anywhere before like 6, 7, 8.
Exactly, and
Like
that's what
there's
I'm saying.
no
That's
way.
why
There's so
it's
many.
shocking to me because I've
Yeah.
seen these drafts where I've seen him in that 4 or 5, and I'm like, what? Like
They,
it boggles my mind.
we should reach out to those guys making the drafts, and see if they need some help from Junkie
Of
Sports in
course,
terms of evaluating talent, because they are ridiculous if they think that.
absolutely.
Absolutely ridiculous. So going into another guy that might fall on draft night, I'll start with Aaron Nesmith. And that's sad for me to say, because I really think that he can be a good player in the next level. But because of the injury concern, because, he's pretty one dimensional in terms of what he's offering to teams, and that's like true 3-point scoring. And the fact that coupled with an injury, I think is probably enough for teams to be looking for guys that have more skill sets to offer to them, that they would just rather take whenever it's coming to draft night. So I wouldn't be surprised if Aaron Nesmith is a guy that ends up going late first round as opposed to somewhere in the lottery. Even though I think the talent is there, I just think teams aren't, willing to take that risk with someone that's very one dimensional.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. I know he's someone I've talked about as a potential dark horse candidate, but yeah, I agree. I mean, I put him on there because of his shooting, but at the same time, he's lacking in a couple areas of his game, and so that's a good point. Someone I think could really fall in this draft. I mean, I'm talking like late first round. I could see
Oh,
a
okay.
couple other guards
Wait.
get
Let me
picked before
pick.
him, and that's
Let me
R.J.
pick.
Hampton.
Oh,
Oh, I already said it. My bad.
no, I was
It is
gonna
R.J.
say,
Hampton.
are we gonna go with some more Alexei Pulkovetsky hating? Let me see.
Yeah, but I just
RJ?
I think RJ Hampton didn't have the best season overseas in the Australian League. I just I don't know, man. I think he's in a really weird spot because he was a little bit of a higher sought off prospect out of high school before he decided to go overseas, but I just don't think he had the greatest season over there. He's a really long, athletic sort of scoring power combo or point combo guard. Um, I don't know. I just think he's in this weird spot because I think there's other point. He's in that really weird like middle ground of there's other point guards that have way more upside than him in my opinion, and then there's other guards that are point guard ready. And so I think he's going to get in this situation where after these more upside point guards get selected higher in the draft, as they typically do in the lottery with the worst teams, I think there's gonna be in that switch into these teams that want these NBA ready point guards, and we've kind of talked about them tonight. And I really think he's gonna slip like really late first round. I don't think he's gonna get picked up as early as a lot of people think, just because I mean, would you rather have RJ Hampton or would you rather have someone like I mean, we talked about him tonight, but like Tyrese Maxey, there's Trey Jones, Cassius Winston. You talked about Malachi Flynn. I mean, there's all these guys that I think might get selected before him. And so if I'm him, I mean, if I'm his agent, I'm definitely nervous and he really needs to have some solid pre-draft workouts because especially coming from overseas, there's not going to be as much film and it's going to be harder for scouts. A lot of times these overseas players it's harder for scouts to go out and see him and things like that, especially with COVID. Especially
Yeah,
with COVID.
definitely. No, that being said, though, I think kind of like the whole Cole Anthony situation going on here. I also, as much as I agree with you, I could also see him surprising people and rising randomly on draft night
Uh-huh.
as well. And that's just because, he was such a high prospect coming into, this previous season where he didn't necessarily have the best season, similar to Cole Anthony. And so, maybe teams are kind of willing to excuse that last season and look beyond that to, kind of what he was kind of, coming out of high school, what was so appealing about his game, which hasn't really changed a lot. And so, maybe he does end up sneaking into the lottery. That also wouldn't surprise me. So he's another one of those guys that just makes this whole draft very interesting because I wouldn't be surprised to see him go 12. I wouldn't be surprised if he slips in the second round. It's
Yeah.
hard to tell. It's very hard to tell. So kind of going along that same mold, this one's a little bit harder to say he's going to fall hard, but I'm going to say Precious Achua. And the reason why I say it's hard to say that he's going to fall significantly is just because there's not a lot of centers that are going to be going in this draft. And he's, probably right alongside, in the top 3 or 4 centers. But a lot of teams have him, after James Wiseman as like, and Onyeka Okongwu, if you classify him as a center or power forward, that's kind of up to you. But a lot of teams have him as the next guy, which I just really disagree with. I don't see a lot in Precious Achua's game that really can translate to the NBA. Yes, he's a rim runner. He's got the hustle, but he's also a guy that struggles with foul trouble. And someone like Jalen Smith out of Maryland, I like a lot more. Maybe someone takes a gamble on Alexia Polskavetsky or however you say his freaking name and whatnot. And, takes him instead of who was I talking about?
Precious.
Yeah, Precious Achua. I don't know. Like, I think Precious Achua had a lot more opportunity, obviously, because he was playing in Memphis and James Wiseman kind of up and left after that whole investigation kind of went on. But that being said, like, I really think that man's got bust written all over him.
Mm-hmm.
And so I I pray for teams like the Pelicans, like just not. Please don't take him. Just
Yeah,
don't.
I
It's a
agree.
trap.
So I have one last thing I kind of want to bring up to you before we sort of wrap this up. So out of our top three for most drafts, if not all of them, but they kind of have not necessarily in this order, but like Lamelo Ball, Anthony Edwards, and James Wiseman going in the top three. Out of those three guys, who do you think is most likely to fall out of the top three?
Oh, that's tough. My oh god. Well, okay, we have to think about who would be moving up because that helps
That's
answer that
true.
question. So, do we think that Denny Avdia would sneak in there or Onyeka Kongwu?
I
Because
mean, I
in my
also wouldn't be
opinion,
surprised to see a team maybe take Obi Toppin. I mean,
no
there's so many guys. I
way.
don't know, dude. I'm telling you, I think a team's gonna pick him early. It's gonna be a dumb decision, or he's gonna drop. I don't know. This graph is crazy. It's so crazy.
Whichever team takes Obi Toppin, if it's before like 6 or 7, they're just dead to Junkie Sports Media podcast.
We're never
Period.
talking about them again.
Period. They do not know how to evaluate talent. And granted, I did have him as rookie of the year, so we'll see. And no problem. But going on to your question, I think out of those guys, I think Anthony Edwards might be the guy that slipped because specifically I think Charlotte, if they're picking, they're not going to pass up on James Wiseman if he's still on the board. And the Warriors, I think if LaMelo is still available and they choose not to trade, I don't see why they wouldn't take LaMelo. And so it kind of comes down to what happens at number one. And so if we're assuming that, someone, well, okay, that's tough because, like I said, that means someone else would be sneaking in there. So I don't know if
Yeah,
any of those other guys are going to be necessarily sneaking in there. But Charlotte's been talking about, moving up to the number one pick to try to secure James Wiseman because they're worried that he might not be available later. So, if that trade's successful, that means, that it goes Wiseman and then, either Edwards or LaMelo after that. But I don't know. That's a very hard question for me to answer. But I would say there's probably more question marks around, the. I don't necessarily think there's a bunch of extra upside that Anthony Edwards has that um, compared to LaMelo and James Wiseman. Those are both guys that have a huge, huge ceiling. And I just don't see that specifically with Anthony Edwards. I know he's one of the more like put together players, but in terms of question marks on his motor and some of these other things and not having as big of a ceiling as, a foreign player like Denny Avdia, or Killian Hayes even, maybe Edwards is the guy that slips from there. What
yeah,
do
I
you
know.
think?
I know. For me, I've got to go James Wiseman, and the
Really?
reason why is just because I think centers are dead, and I think James Wiseman can fill into this role of a. I mean, I think he can definitely like he'll be able to stretch the floor in the NBA. I know there wasn't a lot on him because of his extremely shortened season out at Memphis, but I mean, he's shown touch beyond the arc. He has a lot of moves. It's just like it's hard for me to like grasp the idea of centers just being a sustainable option for a team in the NBA. I mean, when you look at some of the better centers in the NBA, I mean, I saw Nikola Jokic get sat in the playoffs for defensive reasons because he's getting cooked and he can't guard Anthony Davis. And that's one of my biggest concerns is um I'm not extremely high on centers in the NBA. I think they can fill certain roles, but um when you're selecting so high in the draft, I mean, at the end of the day, you are also looking for a guy who's going to be your next franchise player. And I think James Wiseman he's a great talent, but he's someone I see as more of a number two, maybe a number three option, which by no means is bad, but I just don't see him as like your guy for an NBA team. I don't think he can be your best player on your championship team. Whereas I think LaMelo Ball, I think Anthony Edwards could be those guys. So in my opinion, I think James Wiseman's the most likely to drop. However, as we have said, it honestly comes down to what I think it's not. I think it's gonna be teams moving up because, I mean, Charlotte does have a need for a center. The Warriors have a need there, but I also think Anthony Edwards is better than James Wiseman in terms of ceiling. And I think it's also been absolutely proven that the Scary Terry experiment out in Charlotte has not worked. And I mean, I think an Anthony Edwards, Devontae Graham backcourt would be extremely entertaining to watch. I think Charlotte even came out, and again, this could just be draft conspiracies and rumors getting spread, but they did come out and say that Anthony Edwards was, in their opinion, the best prospect in the draft. Whether or not that's actually true, I guess we'll see on draft night. But I do think, as we kind of said, this is going to be an entertaining draft for sure. But if I had to pick, I'm going to go with James Wiseman falling out of that top 3.
All right. All right. I don't know. I just James Wiseman, I think he's gonna make teams feel real silly for not picking him. Who if he doesn't go, number one, which he's probably not, because teams are saying, or specifically the Timberwolves, James Wiseman said he does not want to play there. He does not want to go number one because he doesn't want to play alongside Karl-Anthony Towns. He wants to be the dog. And I don't know, from what I've seen from James Wiseman, I think he is so gifted. He seems like he has the most unicorn potential in this draft class to be just an absolute monster in the NBA. And I understand the argument that the center is a little bit of a dead position, but rebounds are always going to be valued.
Yep.
Someone that, can get their shot up over smaller guys if teams elect not to have centers on the court, in the sense that this dude's 7'1". If the other team's not running a center, he's getting free looks anywhere on the court, and he's able to knock down the three. So, he's gonna be, kind of getting his way if the center position is dead in coming years. And so I don't know. I could see Wiseman being the best center in the league in 3 years, which is wild to say.
Yeah.
But I think he's got a lot in his bag that a lot of centers don't. He's able to, transition the ball up the court. He's got solid handles for a big man. His playmaking in transition's pretty freaking solid. We've talked about his ability to knock down the three, but not only that, he's a good shot creator too, in the sense that he has different moves, once he does have the ball, top of the arc or wherever, to kind of get up a clean look, mid-range, wherever. And his defensive capability. I really like James Wiseman. So we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. I think at the end of the day, I think this is going to be one of the craziest, most wild draft nights we will be seeing in a long, long time. But yeah, so that wraps up our draft special here at Junkie Sports Media. We hope you all watch the draft on November 18th here coming up in about 5 days. And then we will discuss our next episode. We're going to discuss sort of how that draft went, kind of talk through some of those picks. It might be a little bit of a longer episode because I know we both agree there's definitely going to be a lot of movement in this draft. So, and that'll wrap it up. Peace.